Hello. I am here today with Shannon Godfrey and Julia Gustafson, the co founders of The Commons, which is a really exciting new app for K 12 schools that we're going to learn all about. But before I even tell you what the app does, I want to hear more about your career arcs, Shannon and Julia, because you've been in this industry for a long time. You've done a lot of important work around making K-12 schools better and more able to manage technology. And I think that's really important to the founding of the Commons. So if you wouldn't, Shannon, if you could just lead us off with, who you are, where you came from, and why it was really important to you to step back and start the Commons, just about a year ago.
Yeah, definitely. I appreciate that. I've spent my entire career in startup organizations and more specifically in education technology, where I've really have seen the positive impacts that technology can bring to our schools around efficiencies, improved in education, more personalized support for individual students that need it. And that's been really impactful for me. And part of my career also allowed me to start going into more emerging markets that didn't exist before, a little disruptive from maybe what existed prior in the education landscape. And I found for myself that I really loved what I was doing on being able to support student success and how technology could play that role, but also emerging markets. I really thrived in and was excited by. And so through all of that and changing, different careers and kind of continuing to grow my professional background, that led me to an organization that was focused on helping schools go phone free, not necessarily through technology like an app or software, but through a physical tool, a lockable phone pouch. And it was really exciting based on seeing someone emerging as a new sort of technology coming into this space and really helping to solve a critical issue that was emerging really rapidly in our schools. And so that was really my background on being able to learn about this new area of phone distractions that was happening during the school day and getting to see what worked well and what was not necessarily working the best from a scalability and being able to really conform to schools' needs. And that's where my background in technology is like, man, technology can really help solve this modern problem. We need a modern solution. And so that was my background, which also led me to meeting with Julia and where our backgrounds collided and where we met each other, which I'll let her get a little bit more into.
Yeah.
Yeah, please, Julia, go ahead. Before I launch into phones and schools questions and comments.
Yeah. Yep. Well, Julia here. I have a background in public health and public policy, really stemming into behavior change initiatives. And so my background is a little atypical. It's not a business background, but for a while I was working at the Stanford Prevention Research Center, all on an initiative on what contributes to people's well-being, but also what detracts from it. And through all of that research, what we ended up finding was that social connectedness is the number one driver for people's well-being, and that's in-person social connectedness. At that same time, um, I had a real lived experience where I was at a peanut bar with some friends, and if you don't know what a peanut bar is, it's where
I
you get
don't.
peanut shells all over because you just can shove
Oh, literally a peanut bar.
a peanut bar. Um, and I looked up and it was like the Twilight Zone moment where everyone else's head was down looking at their phones because that was the
Yeah.
same time that the infinite scroll came and algorithm-based apps. And so in work, I was theorizing all about social connectedness, what contributes and takes away from somebody's well-being, and then had this real world moment. And that led me to searching out who was doing something practical about this. And it turns out, and I'm going to lift the veil on this lockable pouch company, it was Yonder. So I joined Yonder as one of the first employees in their education division, really thinking about how do you programmatize a lockable pouch system to support schools and to support students. And so through that work and really growing Yonder's education division in the United States and also globally in Australia and Europe, it was incredible to see the impact when you removed phones in schools. There were fewer fights and better student engagement, but um, what we ended up seeing was that the solution was really clunky and unsustainable. And most importantly, it didn't really drive lasting behavior change. And ultimately, that's what we want to see as something as critical as this, which is a public health issue, which is why I care so much about it in the first place. And insert Shannon there, she came in to really drive partnerships, and that's where our relationship began.
Awesome. Thank you. Why don't we go to Shannon? If you could tell us in a nutshell, what is the commons?
Yeah, the commons, you can think of it as an airplane mode for schools. So, what we're doing is really helping schools enforce their phone policies, reduce burden off of our teachers, and ultimately remove distractions from the phones without actually taking away the phone. We're an application and software based solution that's helping our schools do this, which is also allowing them to manage state level phone mandate expectations, and really helping with the how. Like, how do schools help implement a policy and help students get these distractions away? And that's really where you insert the commons. We're a technology based solution and application that's helping to eliminate those distractions during the school day automatically.
And this is sort of an impossible question, but can you talk about like why is that so hard, right? Because I think what is hard for me, just like watching this debate, is I think that a lot of parents and policy advocates and whatnot want it to be really black and white of like phones, no phones. And I get that on some level, right? And I have two young children that fortunately are not yet campaigning for phones, but I can like see that coming down the pike. And I can see the like sort of catharsis of just being like, no phones. But like I know it's way harder than that. And so maybe Julia from your sort of like research background, like what is the nuance here that makes this such a complicated problem to solve?
Yeah, I mean, you brought up just a lot of good points in this. And I think one, it's really, it would be so ideal if this was a black and white situation. And I think you're bringing up something that's very common with public health scenarios is when you think about just say no to drugs or sex education and abstinence based models, like people realize that there's some issues going on and it's bubbling under the surface and finally it pops. And the easiest thing to do is to say, well, just say no. Let's pretend it doesn't exist. We're going to lock it away. You can think about mental health or any of those things. But the reality is that is the first step in addressing this larger narrative of how do we actually support individuals when they need to make a choice in the moment. And so that's when where learning models have adapted around all of those topics. And I think that's where we are with this cell phone debate. So it's really hard because a lot of times getting a cell phone for a child is an emotional decision and it's wrapped around their safety. So it's not really about what's going on social media or the gaming, or they're not thinking about any of that. Parents are thinking about worst case scenarios in the event of an emergency or keeping their child safe on a day-to-day basis. They're thinking about social media and all these other things as more like ancillary. But that's actually what's happened. Like those are the bad things that happen on the day to day basis. And that's really what the challenge is when they're going into schools and the students' attentions are being disrupted on a frequent basis. And so it's a really sticky conversation because one, it's emotional, and two, we're at the very forefront of it.
Yeah, and I grew up in this sort of like twilight era where, I got a cell phone in eighth grade, seventh grade, eighth grade. And it was during the time where cell phone companies could still charge per text message. And I had this is obviously a very formative experience because I still remember it in detail. But I had a month where I racked up a text message bill of like $200. And, you know, setting the money aside, which was its own complex thing that like I was fortunate that it wasn't that big a deal to my family. But like it was an impetus for my dad to talk to me about like, "Hey, like, what are you doing? Like, who are
Yeah.
you texting so many times?" And, $200 was like, 12 texts at that point in time, but, I think it, like, forced this explicit moment that does that moment still exist? Like, how do parents address that now? Like, where are those opportunities? Like, is that part of your goal with the Commons to create those opportunities?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Well, yes, that's what's happening. I think what's really interesting too with a lot of states having these phone debates is there's this misconception that a phone ban means phones are not actually coming to school, and that's not what's happening, right? Students are still bringing their phone to school, but they're asked to put it down. And when they're asked to put it down, there's a lot of competing priorities and applications that are designed to hijack attention and keep you on their apps, and students haven't developed self-regulation and they're learning FOMO and impulse control. All of this is happening at one time, and so I think that's what's ultimately happening. Is we've seen in a variety of different examples, like Julia mentioned, is these societal problems or scenarios that come up that schools have to inherit. And so, as we started to support schools in going phone free, we started getting a lot of insights and market research where schools would come up and say, well, what about when the phone is used as a tool? How do we help students understand intentional phone use versus non intentional phone use on the screen time? How do we help students develop self regulation? How do they learn digital literacy? Like, where are they supposed to learn digital literacy? Are some of the skills that they need to learn in order to get into the workforce or into higher ed the skills we're teaching them? And how does the phone, a modern problem, like morph into that? So that's the conversations that we started to have with other school leaders where it's like, yes, we need to remove this burden and get teachers not, we don't want teachers to be phone police. And we want to make sure that schools can manage the state mandates that exist out there. But this other aspect is what schools started really speaking to us about is what about some of these other durable skills, and how do we help students actually learn to manage the phone? If we just lock it up and pretend it doesn't exist, are we helping them managing it correctly? Are we helping them on giving them those digital citizenship skills and digital literacy? And do they understand how to properly navigate their phone? And so I think that was our aha moment. We hope that families are more equipped on having those conversations, but there's a lot of information out there and it's difficult to understand what to say, what not to say, just like recycling, nutrition, health, all of these different areas. So for the school and the families to partner together to further support our students, that's what we want to see. That's one of our hopes on what we do as we infuse both digital citizenship curriculum and the learning and teaching behind it, but also the guardrails for students to practice this in a safe environment of learning how to manage their phone. It's just something we haven't had to necessarily do before. So, like Julia mentioned, the quick thing to do when distractions came up, it's like, we got to get rid of this right away. And now we're starting to say, well, that was a good step forward, but how do we continue to develop, provide the skill sets, provide the necessary education? And in some scenarios, we do have schools where the phone is used as a tool from a medical standpoint, an education standpoint. So, how do we help students or schools navigate proper use during the school day versus, making sure that students can't get on TikTok in math class? And what does that what does that look like? It's not a one size fits all for schools on how they're teaching students. And it's surely not a one size fits all for families and students on where their skill set lies at that time. So that's really where we saw that need of it's not just about blocking the distraction. It's really about educating and facilitating an environment that students can learn how to navigate their phone use.
Yeah, I think what's always sort of struck me about the phone ban conversation specifically is it feels like a do as I say, not as I do argument of like my phone is like right there. Like, I probably have a couple of text messages, and I over the years have had to figure out how to focus, right? Like, do I stay focused on you guys? Do I look at the phone? Like, it's not
Mhm.
ringing, and it's not ringing from like my son's school. So, but that's like a learned behavior, and I don't I that's what I've struggled with is like you have to learn that at some point. I actually couldn't tell you when is appropriate. Maybe you guys can tell me,
Mhm.
um, at what age that does become appropriate. And I think maybe to frame it at a larger scale, like what does the product development process look like for you? Like
Mhm.
where you are you going to the school first and backing into the product, but how did you arrive at today's iteration of the app? What was your sort of customer discovery process like?
Yeah, I mean, it was really helpful that Shannon and I collectively spent 6 years working with schools really in
Sure.
this space, like seeing what worked and where the opportunities to do better by our teachers, our admin, and our students. And to your question earlier, parents have always been a North Star for us because they're instrumental if we really do want to help shape students' behavior and agency around their device use. Because a lot of exactly what you said, do as I say, not as I do. We also need to help parents walk the walk a little bit better as well. And we're seeing this as a really good opportunity to help facilitate those conversations with parents alongside of them versus school districts taking drastic measures to policies that parents might not agree with. The Commons has been a really good middle ground in that way and actually helped schools facilitate really meaningful conversations with parents in a way that they haven't been able to before. Um, but in terms of how we really developed our technology, Shannon and I have friends and contacts at schools who are teachers, who are administrators. And when we were ideating on this, we went to them and we said, "Hey, does this make sense? Can technology solve technology in this case? And would you use something like this if we created an app and here's a dashboard where you can see which students are doing well and which students maybe need some more support getting back on task because they're really distracted by their phones?" And it was like this aha moment for teachers and admin because no longer would they have to play whack-a-mole. No longer was this an equity issue because the same students were always getting targeted for cell phone infractions. This was legitimate data that was getting surfaced to how students were doing with their phone use during the school day. And the really nice part is that we've set it up so it is an automatic activation. No longer do teachers or school leaders have to greet students in the morning saying, "Lock your phone up in a pouch," or let me collect
Yeah.
it. It's just like, "Hey, good morning, Matt. Hey, good morning, Shannon. Hope you have a great day." And it's set off from there. They don't have to do anything else. Those guardrails are automatically activated so that, like Shannon was saying, students have a safe practice environment where they can start developing agency over their device use throughout the day in conjunction with whatever the school's policy is for those phones.
It sounds really flexible in terms of what the administrator or whoever's making that call can do. Could you give a couple examples of like people or schools or districts or whatever sort of frame of reference you want to provide are doing this really well, like that you think others could potentially learn from?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, a couple examples come to mind. So this past year was our first year in the market. We have 10 founding school partners. We're working with 7,700 students across 4 states: Minnesota, Florida, Texas, and California. And I think it's about 80%, so 8 out of the 10 schools, they actually have full phone-free bell-to-bell policies.
Okay.
So they're bringing the commons in to support those phone-free policies, and what they've really liked about it is that they have been able to stop collecting phones. They have taken that lift off of the teachers, and they are now giving that trust back to the student because their phones are boring again. So those impulses the students have to grab their phones are less and less and less, and they're seeing the same successes as they were with collecting phones, but now the students have their phones on them. and have access to them in the event of an emergency. So parents also feel very comfortable with that. But we're seeing students check out more basketballs during like lunch periods again.
Hmm.
And I think the coolest thing that we heard, this was from a school in California in the LA area who before the commons they didn't have a student cell phone policy. And then they went
Hmm.
to a full phone free policy, but with the commons. And if they see the phone out, they know that it's for an academic purpose and or it ends up being a different conversation versus a policy infraction, right? Where it's like, "Well, Matt, I your phone's out, like, what's going on?" And the conversations they're having is, "Hey, miss, I'm on Power School and I just got an A on my test." Like, that's a really cool conversation versus, like, a slap on the wrist, like, your phone wasn't supposed to be out. So, we're seeing successes in that way, and I think you can talk about it being a full phone-free policy, but, the gray area in between is also something really interesting for Shannon and I, and, a lot of those schools have started actually whitelisting certain apps. So, like a physique app, which is a physics app for
Hmm.
science experiments, or just little things. They're now reintroducing the phone back for academic purposes.
Gotcha. Yeah, I like that. I think a lot of people tend to shy away from these gray areas because they're not sure. It's hard to know whether you're right, frankly. And it's what feels right today might feel wrong tomorrow for lots of different reasons. And I think like, I sort of admire a willingness to put a stake in the ground and say, you know what, like it's an important problem. We have to try. We can't just like abdicate responsibility. And that's sort of what I appreciate about what y'all are building. And I guess maybe to sort of round us out, could you talk about, I expect, and I suspect you suspect, that the conversation around phone use in schools will look pretty different in, let's call it 5 years, right? So not 20 where we can just make stuff up, but 5 years, which is long enough for the ecosystem to get more sophisticated about it. What are and obviously like the conversation could get super dark and like super like, you know, I have Sauron, but like let's assume it's going to be positive, right? Like we're just going to set that off to the side. Let's assume that the conversation develops in a positive way. What are some of the key points that you think we'll be talking about? And again, you can choose your frame of reference to be parents, it can be administrators, it can be students.
Right.
Um, and it could be, media analysts or whatever too. But I'm mostly interested in parents, students, and administrators. What are some of the things that you think we'll be talking about?
Yeah, you know what's interesting, Matt? I think when we first started helping schools go phone free, it was very much like, how do we get rid of the phone? And as we started implementing with it, the conversation of a live implementation would say, well, what happens when I do need to use this app in class? What happens when this scenario takes place? And it was like, well, you unlock the pouch and have unfettered access again. Like, how do you conform and adjust to what a school needs? And so what's interesting to me is that we're already having these unique conversations of how does it fit within the school environment, and how can our schools kind of choose how to not only follow a phone mandate that is existent with their states, but also collaborate and align with families to find that compromise. And when the commons didn't exist, it was like, well, we just lock it up, or we hope that our teachers don't continue to quit and get upset because they can't manage the phone policing aspect. And so I think we're already at that place where we have so many of our schools telling us, that they have these unique situations where a phone may be needed, not during the day. And we're not advocating to use, unfettered access to the phones. And if it doesn't need to be there, put it down, and let's not allow students to be distracted. Let's make sure that schools can abide by the rules and what's needed for them as well. But to me, that conversation is already happening where some of our schools are scratching their heads saying, I didn't think locking it up or these abstinence based programs were the right programs. And that for us was what was really exciting about the commons. It's like a modern day problem needs a modern day solution. Technology can adjust and conform. And so our adjusting, it's like it's a scalable solution. It can roll out to any school anytime right away and get up and running. But we can start to conform to, well, do we have after school programs also going phone free or just the school day? And maybe we change that depending on the school or how students are managing this. So let's think about that. Is it all academic apps? Or is it certain apps that are more appropriate for the phone use or only available on phones? Like we had a music class with like a trombone tuning app. You know, it's like, and it's just used on mobile, and like the laptop isn't the right place. So how do we start to have those conversations when schools are realizing we also don't want to compromise innovation in the classroom when it's been vetted, when it's used appropriately to aid in that student's success? So what does that look like? So I am really excited because some of those conversations, it's what led to the commons. And now it's leading to the transformation of how do we continue to evolve and really integrate into the school's ecosystem so that this becomes a really supportive solution for them, not only minimizing phone distractions and helping them enforce their policies, but what more can it do for that student? So to me, those conversations are happening with schools. They maybe just aren't as loud in the media just yet, but then we're seeing this really positive momentum and impact with our schools that are, you know, allowing those stories to come to life. So I think that's one of the things I'm really excited for that I'm seeing now, but also that what Julia was saying, our North Star of like in a public health issue, you have to bring the schools, the families, and the students together on creating a solution and creating an advancement where the distractions that we see today are not going to be the same distractions in the future, and that students can learn to manage their phone and are learning at the appropriate age. Just like any other technology that's come out, you have age restrictions, guardrails, education that comes into it. But with phones, we like skip that. We try to go straight to bans and lock them away. And so that to me is what we're at the forefront with, that is going to evolve and allow that natural evolution of learning how to manage phones and it just be a simple thing to do when you step foot on campus. But anyways, I'm sure Julia has some examples, but that's just what I'm really excited for because we're already in those conversations.
Yeah, I mean, piggybacking off that, I think I'm most excited about where everything goes with student agency at the center of the conversation. And I think so many people I think because this conversation around cell phone use is at the forefront and center and it had been bubbling under the surface for so long, it is now allowing all voices to come up and hearing from all the different perspectives, and now it's allowing the conversation to adapt and grow versus simmering under a surface. And so I am excited for the continuation of conversation and the evolution of it, knowing that student agency over their device will eventually become the center of it versus just simply locking something away, because agency around decision making and better choices has always ended up becoming the end goal in all of these other examples that we've provided. And so Shannon and I are excited to be spearheading that and speaking with legislators about the importance of this and how you can think about adapting statewide mandates to have student agency be more at the heart of the policies that they're creating. And like Shannon said, we're already having conversations with so many school admin who felt that over the years and didn't think locking phones away were the right solution. So I know we're there and we're on to something, and technology is a really dynamic way to be able to achieve that in collaboration with schools, parents, and students.
I'm so happy you used that word agency. It's my word of the year. We spent last year talking about agents. I really think the emphasis with AI, with technology use, with everything, I think really what is incumbent upon us as people who are supporting young people growing into the world is teaching them agency and different levels of agency are appropriate for different ages, and we're still figuring that out. I don't think any of the three of us, at least, would pretend to know exactly when it's appropriate to get a Facebook account. Maybe we know there's certain ages we know definitely isn't, but
Yeah.
these questions are so hard. And but I think having that focus and that emphasis on agency is just feels like the right North Star. So I all of that is to say, I'm grateful that you guys are working on this. I'm excited to continue following along. And I hope that we get a bunch more folks interested as a result of doing this together, and we get to do it again soon.
Thank you, Matt.
Yeah, appreciate that.
Awesome.